Hello again. Today, I'm going to talk to you about COVID and cancer. It's actually the fourth video I've made over the last 3 years. This is about this time of year on this subject. One every year, they've actually taken all of them down. I think it's important to say what I'm going to talk about today right up front. First of all, I'm going to focus totally on the spike protein. Secondly, I've had so many emails from you all, and what you ask usually is how safe is the safe and effective medical intervention that we're given? What can I do about long COVID and spike protein? How can I get it out of me, the spike protein? And some people even ask, how can I get mRNA out of me? I want to tell you that Johns Hopkins, the big hospital in America, they're officially the sort of American government appointee. They're sort of in charge of coordinating everything. They are the official voice on this, and they say that you cannot detox mRNA and you can't detox spike protein. The body breaks it down very, very quickly. Okay. This show is about what you can do to reduce your load, you reduce your effects of the spike protein. And at no point do I intend to be controversial or wish to be controversial. Every single reference, every single point I make is a reference from articles that are on the front page of Google and their sections. So they're all in the top 5 or 6. So Google's approved them. Okay, let's be quite clear about this. And what I've done in parallel to this right now is being released on the 23rd of April, 2023. It's being released a blog. And the blog goes with this video, and the blog has got every single reference. I think there's about 19 references in it. So it's every single reference. You can click on any one and you can go there and see what it says for yourself. And all I'm trying to do is make sure you're absolutely clear there is no misinformation of any sort on this video. Now, if for any reason this video is taken down, we're also going out not just on YouTube, but we're going out on Rumble as well. So hopefully we've got this all covered. What I'm specifically going to do first is explain as simply as I possibly can what the spike protein's effects are, in particular on 4 organs. Number 1, your lungs. Number 2, your heart. Number 3, your brain. And number 4, the biggest organ in your body, your microbiome. Okay, because they're all inevitably linked because you've got a gut-brain axis, you've got a gut-lung axis. So that's the background to it. Now, let's start. I'm going to try and keep this simple. What happens when spike protein arrives at the lungs? This is perhaps the simplest area to explain. The spike protein binds to a receptor called ACE2, ACE2. And immediately it does it, it breaks, it cleaves. And it cleaves because this coronavirus actually has a protease, an enzyme in it called furin. And this is what makes this coronavirus unique. Ordinary coronavirus don't seem to have furin in. Anyway, furin causes the break. And what it means is your immune system has to kind of play catch up, because it thought it was after spike protein, then suddenly it's bound to ACE2, and then suddenly it's in 2 parts. So its coupling and division makes it harder for the immune system. And this is why it's more likely to invade cells. It makes it easier for the COVID-19 to invade other cells. Now, what happens when it gets into crosses into the cells of the lungs is the mitochondria, the power stations power down. There are more reactive oxygen species around. Oxygenation lowers, the oxygen levels lower in your body, and you also get more cytokines. So, in a bit of confusion, your white cells flood into the area to try and negate this, and you get what's called a cytokine storm. So lowered oxygen, more reactive oxygen species, and the whole thing powers down. It's called acute respiratory syndrome. And actually, this is what kills you. So the research is quite clear on this, how it works. And secondly, the research says that spike protein alone can do this, or spike protein attached to a bit of vaccine. Sorry, not a bit of, not vaccine, virus. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether it's become separated from the virus or not. Researchers actually talking about the lungs concluded that what you needed to do was protect yourself with as many antioxidants as possible. We'll come to all this. Then I'm going to come to the heart. Now, one big finding from the research is that you can get heart complications 1 year or more after the initial infection. So this can be one of the reasons, I'm not saying it is the reason, but it can be one of the reasons why people seem to have problems and sudden death syndrome and so on. Now, people also can get the heart problems where they have seemingly beaten COVID. So you got rid of it, but suddenly bang. Why? There are 3 reactions, if you like, from the heart. First of all, exactly as I've just explained with lungs, the spike protein binds to the ACE2 receptor on heart muscle, and in it goes into the heart muscle and damages the heart muscle. So that's number 1. Number 2, what you get in the blood and lymph, but particularly the blood, is inflammation with spike protein. So the heart has its own immune system, and this is activated by spike protein. And that is true across several research studies, wherever you get the spike protein from. And what we know is that inflammations prompts heart problems, blood problems, cardiovascular problems. And this inflammation is actually given a term. It's called multisystem inflammatory syndrome. And this inflammation, for example, can cause myocarditis. So you get an inflamed heart and you can go on to be in trouble and die because of the inflammation. Second system. The third system, you can see it's complicated, right? Third system is you can get blood clots. And the reason for this is platelets. So you have platelets in your bloodstream. They're part of the white cell system. They help your blood clot. If you have very low platelets, oncologists, doctors will be worried you're going to bleed to death. So platelets cause blood clots on your arm when you cut yourself. And typically platelets might be lowered if you're on cancer drugs. Now, what happens is the spike protein binds to ACE2 on the platelets. And when it does that, again, it's called, you've got this inflammation going on around the outside, but when it does that, in reacting with the platelets, it makes the platelets cause more fibrin, which is what and thrombosin, which are what are used to make clots. So if you like, the clotting potential goes up. And they found this even with what they call platelet poor plasma, which is what you have when you have cancer drugs. So what happens is you get little microclots all over your body, and you can get bigger clots immediately in front of the heart. And what's really happening, and we've seen this in several demonstrations, is it differs between old people like me and young people. So what happens is you actually build up fibrin in your bloodstream, and this causes like fishing nets. And in old chaps like me, we are less likely to have protease enzymes that break down the fibrin. And so what happens next is we can get blood corpuscles stuck in the fishing nets, and then we end up with a stroke. But in younger people, they have more proteases, they have more enzymes that break down the fibrin, and so they are far, far less likely to have a stroke. But of course, if you're having treatment for cancer, you can actually have a DVT, and this can be a result of this fibrin buildup due to COVID and platelets. I can honestly say, we are seeing more DVT in cancer patients on chemo than ever before. I'm sure the oncologists would agree with that. So that's what we're seeing. So blood clots, strokes, DVT is caused by a combination of factors. So you can have a direct heart problem, you can have inflammation in your blood, and you can have a buildup of fibrin, which causes blood clots and so on. So that's the kind of background to the heart. All right, let me move on. What I would say is this: you then got a fourth area, which is the brain. It's much more simple. What happens with the brain is spike protein binds to ACE2 in the brain, bang, it can cross the blood-brain barrier and get inside the brain. And we know that after the disruption of the blood-brain barrier, you see brain tumors. Believe it or not, you see brain tumors. So we've actually seen a man with colorectal cancer get 20 brain tumors. And when I said, I've never heard of that before, he said, that's what my oncologist said. So that's an extreme case. What we know actually happens is exactly the same as before with the lungs. You get far more reactive oxygen species in the brain, you get lowered oxygen, and you can get brain function disruption, basically. So you can get more brain fog. That's the simplest thing. But also what's actually driving it is something called phospholipids. So reactive oxygen species, lowered oxygen, ACE2 activation brings down your phospholipids in the brain and weakens the brain. There's a blood-brain barrier going. Okay. Now, that's, I hope, a simple explanation of the four things, or three of the four things, three of the four organs. I just want to go back to Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins talking about this shot, talk about, they say on the website, I'm going to read it. All three vaccine types either deliver or cause our bodies to make harmless proteins like the ones found on the surface of the COVID-19 virus. That's on there today. Let me move on to the gut. So, with the gut, the biggest organ in the body, we know there is damage in a COVID-19 gut. The real question is, was it there before, or did COVID cause it? Long COVID, I should explain, there's several terms for it, but we'll call it long COVID today. It's well known to a lot of my people, my followers. Long COVID is something that's been with them for 9 months or 12 months. Long COVID is officially defined as where you have COVID for more than 1 month. What can you have? You can have gut issues. You can have lung, chest pain, shortness of breath issues. You can have fatigue. You can have a loss of smell. You can have a loss of taste. You can have brain fog, as I explained. So that's the kind of background to long COVID. And the real issue is, can we work out what's going on here? Well, we can. Because, number one, in Hong Kong, they've done research and they have shown that there are found in the gut very small pieces of spike protein. And so their view is that the spike protein is screwing up the gut. Okay, maybe. It's quite plausible. What I think is more the case is that we have actually got a situation where when anybody gets a chronic illness, and I'll call COVID-19 a chronic illness, you know that it itself, the precursor to it, is a loss of volume in the gut microbiome, a loss of strains of bacteria, and then as a result, your antibody system comes down. You get weaker because you've lost volume and diversity of your gut bacteria. So I suspect if you look back at the early stages of COVID-19 in Europe, what was happening in Italy was something like 98% of the people dying in Italy had a serious comorbidity. They had diabetes, they might have been obese, poor sugar control, high blood fats, and so on. So they were already suffering from a poor microbiome. And I think the issue here is when you look at, and we have several people, even Rob Thomas, actually, one of our medical board, did some research. When you look at the microbiome, what tends to happen, and this is why it's complicated, is the bacteria, for example, protect your lungs. There is a gut-lung axis. What the bacteria that help your lungs the good guys seem to have fallen. So I think it's probably a combination of both. I think people with long COVID have had poor microbiomes to start with, and we know you're more susceptible to COVID-19 if you had a poor microbiome. So I think people have poor microbiomes to start with. But I think secondly, it is quite plausible that people with long COVID still have spike protein around, whether it's a little bit in their gut or whether it's still in their bloodstream, prompting microclots and things like this all over the place and actually worsening your wellness. I don't know, but there's research on all of this. So we're in the area of theory rather than knowledge at the moment. I just think that it's highly likely that all these factors are coming together and that the poor microbiome is linked totally to your long COVID. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Poor microbiome linked to long COVID. Let me just talk about cancer. Well, we're still in the realms of cancer, aren't we? This is all about cancer. Over the last 3 years, I have on the website published research, not a lot, deliberately. And it's all been about people with cancer. So we had the early study, very early study in New York. So this was people with cancer who then went on to get COVID. You know, you're being protected by this safe and effective medical intervention. So it doesn't make matters worse. What we saw in New York was that people with blood and lymph cancers fared the worse. They had a serious increase in the numbers of death, risk of death, if they had blood and lymph cancer and got COVID. Number 2 was pancreatic. Number 3 was lung cancer. And number 4, surprisingly, was colorectal cancer, just behind. Then there were several others. And at the other end of the spectrum, weirdly, people with breast cancer and prostate cancer fared better. And what happened was they lived longer if they had those 2 diseases and got COVID. I've no explanation to offer you. All right. Secondly, I cover research from the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic researchers have probably all been shot by now, because they actually concluded that if you had the safe, effective medical intervention, if you had the SEMI, actually then went and had a wide variety of drugs, any of a wide variety of drugs, you wiped the SEMI out. So there wasn't a lot of point in having the jab. Thirdly, we covered research from the University of Minnesota. And this research was all about, got to be careful if you have the SEMI, because the SEMI in your shoulder actually doesn't stay in your shoulder and lights up whole areas of lymph in your body and can completely screw radiology tests and CT scans and things like this. This was the University of Minnesota worrying about their CT and MRI tests and actually blaming this SEMI that could spread throughout the body. I kid you not. So that's what it said. Now, as you know, I have written a blog about 18 months ago where I talked about how we're seeing people having had the SEMI, especially the booster, having a recurrence of their cancer. That's, I think, what I was talking about. And I was saying we're seeing people who have actually got it all under control, having the jab, and bang, it comes back. And obviously ideal in small numbers. But Professor Angus Dalgleish, who was at St. George's, is one of Britain's top 10. He's just retired. He actually wrote a letter to the British Medical Journal editor on exactly this same point, saying, look, I've been in the business for 50 years. I know what I'm talking about. Actually, I think the boosters are a waste of time. But more importantly, they're prompting a weakened immune system, which in itself prompts more aggression in the cancers. So what you're seeing, I think, is two things. I think that the SEMI actually prompts a weak immune system and causes inflammation. And what do you need if you've got a cancer? You need a strong immune system and minimal inflammation. So that's what I think you're seeing. So I agree totally with Angus Dalgleish. Of course, he's been lambasted in the press, but hey-ho, we have to live through that, don't we? The final thing I've done is I've covered this, I think, on Chris Williams' Health Watch rather than Cancer Active. What we're seeing is after COVID, a prompting of varicella, and in this case, shingles. So we're seeing higher numbers of cases of shingles post-COVID. And the researchers were talking about how viruses don't necessarily act on their own and can be woken up. There can be reaction between viruses. So you seem to have a chain reaction, because what they showed was when people got the shingles, they were more likely to get dementia. Back to the brain again. And there's been no previous findings that shingles are linked to dementia. What they next found was that shingles were waking up the herpes virus. So what happens with herpes 1 or herpes 8 cold sores, or HPV, for example? All three of those viruses go and live in your nerve endings, and they come out to play. We know this when your immune system goes down. So they come out, you think about it, when you run down, you get cold sores. Okay. I've got 5 older gentlemen over the age of 70 in Vancouver, don't ask me why, and they've all got HPV-driven throat cancer. So, you know, their HPVs come out to play because they're older and they have poorer immune systems. So we're seeing this kind of continuum, which is what happens is COVID seems to prompt shingles, varicella, and varicella seems to wake up herpes 8, and herpes 8 seems to, we know, is linked to dementia. So this is another effect that no one's talking about. There seems to be a knock-on effect interplay between viruses. Okay. Now, at this point, I'm going to stop, because Okay, that's it. You got an explanation from me. I hope you're still with me. I want to talk about how you can do things to fix this for yourself. So what have I talked about? And there's much, much more in the blog. All right, I explain it more and so on. But inflammation. So we've heard from Minnesota, you get inflammation in the lymph. You can get inflammation in the blood. Inflammation in the lymph. We have always, you can go back 3 or 4 years and see my videos. We've always suggested you took Boswellia. Okay, I had COVID, I take Boswellia. Okay, what Boswellia is really good at is the edible form of frankincense. It calms down the lymph system. You could do other things. You could take ashwagandha, you can take turmeric, you can take fish oils, you could take a small aspirin, providing you haven't got gut problems, for example, and you're not on blood thinners. But this is where you should be. You should be thinking about something like Boswellia. If you have a problem with the blood system, then we know that you can reduce the issues of inflammation with nitric oxide. Nitric oxide. How do you get nitric oxide? Well, you can go out in the sun. Right? I know that may not be totally relevant to a lot of my audiences. For someone, as you know, I live in the sun. But you can go in the sunshine. And that will help you make more nitric oxide and dilate your blood vessels. The second thing, you can take beetroot. We know beetroot has a major effect on dilating the blood vessels. And thirdly, you can take arginine. So a normal amino acid, you can take arginine. So these 3 things will help your blood flow better. The Boswellia will help calm it all down. Okay. Phospholipids, I mentioned about the brain. How do you increase your phospholipids? You take fish oils. Fish oils actually work with the brain really, really well. This is why people have higher IQs if they take fish oils up until the age of 12 and things like this. So fish oils are linked to longevity and anti-inflammatory issues. So fish oils actually boost your phospholipids in the brain. Number 3, how would you reduce reactive oxygen species? Well, we know those researchers recommended antioxidants. I would start with coenzyme Q10. You can use things like grapeseed extract and echinacea and things like that if you want. But we also know B complexes are quite important in this area. So B1, thiamine, and B3 can affect this positively. But let's stay natural. Let's stay natural. What do we know about antioxidants and reactive oxygen species? What do we know about this? Well, we know polyphenols are really huge in this area. Polyphenols is over 500 in the Colorful Mediterranean diet. It's all on the Cancer Active website. So I'd be eating lots of vegetables and fruits, antioxidants, polyphenols. And we also know that glutathione will do this job. Now, glutathione, people have heard me talk before, is something you must make yourself. You make it largely from green vegetables. You can make it from garlic and onions. Flaxseed will help you make it. So glutathione needs to be made. You make 10% less when you're about 40. You make about 30% less when you're 60. That explains everything. What it is, it's the number 2 antioxidant we make in our bodies after melatonin. And glutathione is linked to anti-aging and it's anti-illness. But you must make it. You can prompt that making with something like NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which you can buy in the chemist. It's cheap tomorrow. But you must make it, because if you make too much, if you take glutathione pills or you have IV glutathione, you can end up having problems in the body. You can go into overload. You need some free radicals in the body. You can't just get rid of all of them. Okay, so glutathione, you need to make green juices of the whey and more onions and garlic. Okay, and flaxseed. So NAC will help. How do you get rid of microclots? Well, again, if you read me or if you watched the videos in the last 3 years, I've told you. I've been going on about nattokinase ever since I was given it. So I tore my shoulder out, and I went to, they have an expert who gets people like Tom Cruise back together again for the shooting on the next day at Pinewood. And I went to him for my shoulder, and he gave me nattokinase, and it works. What it does do, it breaks up all random fibrin around the place. And I looked it up on the web. I read all the research. I did an article on nattokinase probably about 6-7 years ago. And it's there. It breaks up fibrin. So I even have recommended my 27-year-old son takes it. And you can't rely on younger people making more proteases that break it up. So I suggest nattokinase, always have done. You can also take digestive enzymes. They tend to come from plants, like bromelain and papain. And bromelain actually can break down some fibrin. I don't think it's the strongest. I really don't. But then you can also, in your bloodstream, you can bring down inflammation by cutting sugar, and you can cut insulin, and these things will have an effect on your clotting. Okay, so insulin, for example, you could reduce your insulin by cutting your sugar out. Do it for 10 days and see what the effect is, but also by going on to a time restricted fast. So you fast from 6 o'clock in the evening through to 10 o'clock in the morning. I wouldn't do it for a long period of time, just do it for 10 days, and that will have an effect on your blood system. Furin. Okay, I've told you that this COVID has a unique enzyme called furin bound into it. How do you get rid of furin? Well, basically, it's totally natural. It's like polyphenols, bioflavonoids. Bioflavonoids can actually break down furin. Bioflavonoids are typically rutin, limonene in lemon peel. When we talk to people with cancer, I always suggest that people do a green juice. And often with things like estrogenic cancers, I suggest taking the lemon peel, freezing the lemon and cutting off the lemon peel and putting the peel in the juice, because it's an anti-aromatase enzyme factor. But limonene is very good at reducing furin. And then there's asparagine and quercetin. Quercetin was used in some of the protocols from Texas against COVID-19. So quercetin, I don't think it's much of an anti-inflammatory, but other people disagree. But quercetin has lots of other values, one of which it knocks out furin. Okay. And finally, on the microbiome, what can I say? I would take probiotics, but make sure they contain the major two families. Make sure they've got both the family Lactobacillus and the family Bifidobacterium in them. They're the two families you got as a baby, right? There's about 250 members of Lactobacillus, about 200 members of Bifidobacteria. So we're starting to reboot the gut. I would do apple cider vinegar, right? I took mine this morning with lemon juice, first thing. And lime juice, actually. We don't use lemons, we use limes, green limes. Thirdly, I would go and buy some raw cheese. I would go and buy some unpasteurized cheese, goat's cheese, because we've lived with goats for thousands of years, and sheep's cheese. Guess what I was eating last night? A little bit of raw cheese. And what does this do? It gives you trillions of lactobacillus and trillions of bifidobacteria. It completely re-acidifies the gut. That's what you need, an acidic gut, right? An alkaline body, an acidic gut. And I'm taking myself back to younger days, let's put it that way. And when we get to 50, we're more likely to have an alkaline gut. We go up north of pH 7, but you want to be south of pH 7. And if you have high levels of lactic acid bacteria in your gut, you will be south of pH 7, and it keeps the bad guys in check. It can even wipe them out. Those two families can wipe out the bad guys. So I would do that. If you want help wiping out the bad guys, Paldarco, which comes from a tree bark in South America, is known to actually kill some viruses. One of my ladies got rid of her herpes that way. Olive leaf extract can do the job, and basically, on top of Paldarco, I would take oregano oil, because oregano oil is a kind of dual purpose. It kills yeast, it kills bacteria, and it can even kill the odd worm and parasite and things like that. So I'm not talking about major things here. I'm talking about very simple things. Eat better, take a few supplements, right? So I would say that given long COVID, the place to start is with your diet and your gut bacteria, more than almost anything else. That's how I would go about neutral. I had brain fog. I had brain fog after getting COVID. And I actually, as far as I know, where I've beaten it, no one's tapping me on the head at the moment. What I would say, though, is we've talked about in all this show about how the spike protein hangs around. There are two things that can neutralize it. So perhaps I'm going to be controversial at this moment in time. The first one is artemisinin. Again, in my first ever blog on the subject, when COVID came in, I talked about a lot of these things in the article. And one of our readers actually reported me to a British newspaper saying I was going to kill millions of people. Well, I did all this. And actually, because I wrote the article and said, this is what I'm going to do with COVID around, the newspaper let me off. Unbelievable, really. Gotta laugh. Artemisinin actually is a Chinese herb, and we use it to kill yeast and pathogens and so on. But artemisinin is well known for its abilities against malaria. It's very powerful. So a Chinese lady won a Nobel Prize for discovering artemisinin. And we happen to know it can stick to the spike protein and neutralize it. But the big one, of course, dare I mention this, is ivermectin. Now, the very fact that I have viewers in America, Britain, and Australia, and it's been taken off the market, actually should alarm you. And the reason it was taken off the market in those countries is because in America, if you have a treatment, you can't do an enforced mandate semi-program. Okay, so safe and effective vaccines, yeah, fine. But you couldn't have enforced it if there was a treatment around, and that's ivermectin. When we got COVID, my wife had it for 2 days. My son had it for a day. I had not a lot of chance. And I got rid of it probably in about day 5, day 6, but I tested positive for a couple of weeks. But we went to the hospital and the doctor said, I hear you've given your son something. I said, yeah. She said, what have you given him? I said, ivermectin, azithromycin, vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc. And so if you want to bring your COVID-19 spike protein down in your body, I would strongly suggest, never mind the azithromycin, but I would provide the other 4 to your body. Ivermectin, if you could, or artemisinin, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, most important vitamin you've got in your weaponry. What did the doctor do when I told her that's what I'd given to my son? Did she shout at me? No, she went, I think that says it all. I followed India. If you go to Chris Williams Health Watch, I told you exactly what they were doing in India to fight COVID. Ivermectin. Uttar Pradesh, one of the lowest, one of the most populated areas in India, 204 million people in a very small area. You'd have thought they would get loads and loads of COVID. No, the Indian government was giving out Tupperware boxes with a thermometer and oximeter in it, and lots of ivermectin and a few other things, paracetamol and so on. Okay, lowest case level in the country. That's where I'm going to leave you. I hope you've learned something. As I say, there's a blog. It's going to be on Cancer Active. there's a blog which tells you more about all this if that's what you want, and more of the things you can do. But I hope I've summarized the things you can do accurately enough for you and giving you some thought. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.